Item 5, which is Councillor Mark Williams and the Canada Water Leisure Centre report back. Now, we took this as a calling at the last but one OSCE meeting, and we had a lively session and debate on this particular issue at that time, and made some recommendations to the cabinet member. You'll see in your papers that we've had the letter in response. And also the commitment to come along here again this evening. Now, Mark, you had some thoughts about the format that you wanted to follow for this particular item in order to make sure that we kind of get to the bottom of all the issues that you're going to be talking about.
Yeah, no, indeed. I've got a couple of things to say, and then I'll hand over to John and the team. So the first one is, thanks very much for having us back. Since we last met, as I said out in my letter, we've paused the decision-making process for a month on identifying a preferred location for the new leisure centre at Canada Water, and to go forward with the full public consultation and the detailed design process, to give us time, as I said in my letter, to look at all the sites again and to come back in to explain our thinking in more detail and to make sure that we've been as thorough as we possibly can in considering all of the sites. Also as well, I haven't yet formally replied to the 4 recommendations that you made to me following the last meeting, so I'll just quickly reply to those 4 recommendations and then set out how we're going to run this presentation, and then obviously take any questions on them. So on the 4 recommendations that you made to me, I'm going to accept 3 of them in full, that being that the consultation takes place at the same time for all residents in the affected area of the proposed site and those in the wider area, so we'll absolutely do that. On recommendation 3, that the consultation be amended to include details of the options that have been considered and rejected, including other sites within the footprint of the land where the council owns the freehold, and whether or not the existing 7 islands can be demolished and rebuilt, in addition to the preferred option of the council. Then yes, that will happen. And recommendation 4, that the consultation should include space for additional comments and suggestions to be put forward. This would include details of options, including full costs for all options and possible timescales for all options. We will do that with one slight caveat that, as will become clear during the presentation, there's some of the sites that we consider won't be able to provide full costs because the sites in question are physically not big enough to fit the leisure centre on, so we haven't worked at full costs for those because it's physically impossible to build a leisure centre on those sites. For the second recommendation, which is about, which reads, in order to reassure affected residents regarding the consultation on the proposed new site for the Canada Water Leisure Centre, that the Cabinet member should give a public commitment to review the Council's decision to have a preferred site should the consultation receive overwhelming public opposition. I'm not going to accept that in full, but what I will do is all of the consultation responses and all of the information we get back and views from members of the public, whether they be people who neighbour onto the site that's proposed or from the wider area, all their views will be taken into account ahead of us making the formal decision on whether to proceed with this site, and indeed the wider package that we're currently negotiating with British Land, and that decision point will be coming to Cabinet and will be in spring next year at some point, depending on how those negotiations go, so that will be taken into account. However, I can't accept it in full, because my view is if I was to accept this recommendation, it would mean that we'd effectively be handing over control of where the leisure centre goes to British Land, and I don't think that's the right way forward. I think as a council we need to say this is the site that we think best meets the objectives that we've set ourselves to get a new leisure centre built within the next 5 years, to maximise the return to the council of new council homes, new affordable homes, and also the ongoing rent that the council will receive across the whole master plan site. And I feel that if we were to hand that decision over to British Land, that it could come in the second or third development phase. We wouldn't get a new leisure centre for many, many years into the future. And I think it's the right thing that we as a council consult with our residents, get the detailed design worked up, and then take a decision in public, so it's as open and transparent as possible. On the presentation that we're about to receive, because it's a lot of information to get through, we're going to break it into 4 sections, talking about the brief and explaining the brief, talking about 7 islands and refurbishment, then talking about the sites that are outside of the master plan area that falls into where we're negotiating with British Land, and then talking about the sites that are in that area itself. And what I'm proposing is if we keep the presentation as short as possible for each of those 4 sections, and then take questions from members at the end of each one of those sections, rather than having them all at the end, just so that the debate can be as informed as possible. And 2 things really that I'd like to stress to have in your mind whilst John and the team are running through this presentation is there's many drivers for this project, but two of the key ones for consideration this evening is one, we do not want a break in service of the leisure centre site. We want continuous leisure centre provision at Canada Water. And the second one is that we are in the middle of this renegotiation with British Land at the moment. We don't have the freehold unencumbered. There's a number of leases on there, as we explained and ran through last time, and John will touch on that in slightly more detail during the presentation. So if we were to force having the leisure centre on other sites within the master plan area, there would be a significant cost to the council and to the borough and to our residents, and that would mainly be through the loss of affordable housing. But I'll let John talk about that in more detail. So any kind of initial questions, and then over to John.
Yeah, good. That's good. So first, a thought for me on format. That format sounds good if we can come in during through those 4 bits. I should say at the end of that bit, I would welcome questions from people who've come along this evening. One gentleman there in the red top came and spoke to me earlier. But if people have got questions at the end, yes, let's do that at the end of those 4 bits of presentations. But if councillors can ask questions during those 4 sections, that would be great. So,
yeah,
go on.
One question before I start.
I've got Councillor Schimmel, Councillor Dale, and then over to you, Nick. So, Rosie.
So maybe this will come clear later on, but on your partial rejection of recommendation 2, in what respect would it be, can you explain why it would be handing this decision over to British Land? Surely if you were to review the decision in light of opposition from the public, it's just handing the decision over or giving greater power over the decision to residents.
Apologies, maybe I didn't explain that properly. So what I've said is that we will of course review the site and take into account all of the views expressed through the consultation ahead of us making the decision. Of course we'll do that as we would with any consultation. My concern with the wording of the recommendation was that when it says the cabinet member should give a public commitment to review the council's decision to have a preferred site should the consultation receive overwhelming public opposition. The reading of that is that we wouldn't therefore have a preferred site and we'd there effectively be handing it over to British Land, and I don't think that's the right approach. I think we as a council should be setting out the site that we think works best for something which will be a fantastic new resource for the borough.
I suppose perhaps, maybe it's too late to amend this, but perhaps in hindsight it should read to review the council's decision on which is the preferred site, or if there's an overwhelming because I think what we meant is unless I'm misremembering this, if there was an overwhelming opposition to the preferred site that you set out in the consultation, rather than having a preferred site overall.
Not that I could put words into the committee's mouth, but I'm sure that there'll be recommendations at the end of this meeting to myself, and maybe that could be included in there.
That's great, thank you.
Okay.
That was my question.
All right. Good.
And mine too.
Wow, I think that is a record. That's a record. People giving up the right to speak. There you go.
And also, as well, I think there was a laptop malfunction, so we've got hard copies to work through rather than the overhead.
Okay. Right.
We've all seen it already.
Okay. Over to you.
Thank you. Yes. Apologies again. This presentation was designed to be shown behind you on that screen, so the pages are numbered, but I'm going to do my best to take you through it. First of all, can you hear me? Yeah.
Has everybody got a copy, by the way?
Yeah. Has everybody got a copy?
Yeah. There's some more here down at the front.
Okay. I will introduce myself first of all. When you've all got copies. Roughly how long have we got?
Short time as possible.
Yeah.
Okay. I get the message. Right. Good evening. I'm John Abbott. I'm head of Regeneration North in the council's chief executive department, and I've got with me my colleague Tara Quinn, leisure services manager.
I'm the Sports and Leisure Services Manager for
Yeah.
Council.
And could I introduce to you as well Peter Simpson, who's an architect with a company called AFL S&P. Peter's been advising us as our technical architect on the Castle Leisure Centre at the Elephant Castle. He was also the technical architect for the Olympic pool.
Yeah, we were the technical architects for the Olympic pool. We did the Commonwealth pool. We write most of Sport England's guidance.
So somebody with a lot of experience, and I think he's quite close to a lot of the cost issues. He's currently advising Suffolk and a number of other London authorities on refurbishment and new build projects, so he's quite close to some of the cost issues involved in all this. So he's here to aid us with some questions that you may have later on. Moving to the presentation, as we said, 4 parts to it. We're going to break it into 4 parts. Part 1 is the brief. have some questions at the end of that section, move on to talk then about how the brief might be applied to a refurbishment and reconfigured an extension option for Seven Islands itself. We'll then move on to have some questions at that point. A part 3 of it will be then we look at a number of sites outside of the emerging town centre. There again a full redevelopment of Seven Islands Leisure Centre site itself. The Rotherhithe police station site, not in council ownership, but a site that is coming onto the market in the next few months probably. And finally we look at the council-owned water sports centre by Greenland Dock. Questions again at that point, and then we move on to the final part, which we look at the options within the emerging town centre. On that basis, I move to part 1, the brief. I don't intend to read out all of this, because what I hope to be able to do is put this on the council's website at the end of it all, so people can go through it at the leisure in much more detail. In terms of the vision for the leisure centre, which is also driving the spatial brief that we're going to talk to you about tonight, I think there's a couple of important issues that emerge out of there. One is that Canada Water is now identified at both London Plan level and within the AAP that Southwark's adopted as a place for a growing population. Lots of new residential homes are going to be built there, and we need a leisure centre that is able to accommodate and meet that demand. And of course, on top of all that, the council itself has adopted a free swim and gym policy, which again we think will drive an increasing demand for our leisure facilities. On the next page, entitled Site Selection Criteria, I've just picked up from some of the key points that are in the IDM as to what is informing our choice of site selection. It's important that the site is able to accommodate, obviously, our preferred leisure brief, which we'll come on to. We think this needs to be in council ownership, the site. Obviously, that reduces costs to the council. We think that we need to provide it within a 5-year period, and the driver for that is that the council has already agreed a £2 million investment into the leisure centre, which will keep it ticking over, but it certainly won't keep it going for very much longer. And so we need to find a site that's able to accommodate a new leisure centre within a 5-year period. We want, as Councillor Williams has said, to maintain continuity of leisure provision in the area. If you close leisure centres, you lose business, you affect the viability of your leisure offer. So it's important that we think that we maintain leisure continuity in the area. We want to try and minimise planning risk by finding a site that allows us to do that. That's not easy in a dense urban environment like Southwark, and we're going to see with a number of the options that there are issues around that, particularly in regard to how these schemes might affect residents who live by. It's important that the location serves the Rotherhithe and Surrey Keys, Bermondsey catchment areas, so it's well located in terms of public transport access to those areas. And finally, as Councillor Williams has said, it's important that whichever site we do choose is able also to facilitate the wider regeneration of Canada Water, as set out in that November 14 Cabinet report, which set out the Council's priorities for its negotiations with British Land. And those include, of course, the provision of council homes, a financial return to the council in the form of capital receipts and revenue that can support local services, and providing jobs for the residents. And that last bullet point is particularly important when we come on to the final section of the presentation. On the next page, entitled Leisure Centre Requirements, I've set out the brief. At a high level, at the back of this report you'll see there's an appendices which gives you a much more detailed breakdown as how these spatial areas within the leisure centre have been developed. But you can see at the top the key elements: an 8-lane 25-metre pool, a learner pool which is also able to meet people with disability issues as well. We'll probably have a movable floor, thank you. A forecourt sports hall as a minimum, a 150 station gym, a very important feature of a leisure centre in terms of the kind of revenue it can generate for the council, and therefore providing for a sustainable solution financially. 3 studio spaces, which you could do Pilates in and yoga and other kind of activities, and a creche. So those are, and at the bottom you can see there a summary of kind of spatial areas that is then generated from that, totaling about 5,500 square metres in total. And we've given some indication on the left-hand side as to how that then starts to roll itself out as a layout. Now, if we were a suburban borough, we could probably provide this as a kind of 2-storey large shed-like structure. But we're Southwark, this is a dense urban environment. That kind of solution is frankly just not practical. So land is just not available to accommodate that kind of facility. So what I've done on the next page is give you a kind of benchmark illustration of how you might go about doing this kind of new facility in Southwark, and it's based on the castle, the Elephant and Castle. And you can see there's a massing drawing, 24 metres in height at its maximum point, and you can see illustrated on the left-hand side, ground, first and second floor, how we've gone about stacking those uses. A ground floor consisting of the pool and the reception area, moving upstairs to the studio and gym, and then stacked across the top of it at the highest point, a sports hall. But even so, this is a very big building in order to, and you need to find a site that's able to accommodate that. So that's just to try and give you an illustration of those kind of spatial zones and how you might start to lay those out. So that's the end of the section 1, which is about the brief and the site selection criteria and the sort of spatial requirements that we have as a consequence. So if we pause there and take any questions you have at this stage.
I've just got a quick question on the site selection criteria about the final point. Delivery of the wider regeneration. Can you just elaborate a tiny bit more on what that means specifically with the leisure centre? Like, what? Could you just maybe just flesh that out a tiny bit for me?
I can do. Do you mind?
Are you worried about
I would rather come back to it in section 4 because I think it becomes more relevant at that point when
that's
you see
fine.
the potential balances and trade-offs at that point.
That makes sense.
That's okay. I won't forget the point.
Yeah, just on the again on the criteria, the continuity of use issue. You were suggesting that might cause problems. Are you anticipating the Elephant and Castle, which obviously has been out of use for some time? Are you anticipating that there are going to be issues about getting people back in to the Elephant and Castle Leisure Centre or the Castle?
So with the castle, it'll be a fantastic new resource which will be opening very soon.
Yes, when?
Very soon. We're currently switching everything on there, which can take a little bit of time, but there'll be more information about that very soon. So with the castle and with the deal that was struck there to get that leisure centre, which when all's told, which is being paid for by the Elephant development, which it now looks like it'll pay for the whole leisure centre, where we originally thought it'd just pay for about half of the leisure centre because of the deal that we signed with Lend-Lease in that particular location. The reason why the leisure centre had to be breaking continuous service there was because that was where the new tower was, the residential tower was going to be built, which was going to pay for the new leisure centre. We had to reconfigure that area. So we're doing an awful lot of marketing in local schools for local residents to get footfall up there. In addition to the point John made about loss of footfall and loss of use if the centre's closed, and obviously we then have to do an awful lot of work to pull that back up, but we're confident at the castle that we'll be able to do that. It's also that where possible we don't want to have a break-in provision for the local residents and people in the area who use that leisure centre, which is also a key consideration for us.
I'll just add as well that obviously the history of the Elephant Castle Leisure Centre is different to the one we got at the Seven Islands. It was a centre that became partially unusable when the roof of the pool collapsed somewhere around 2001-2. I can't exactly remember. So we had a history of not providing a full leisure offer at the Elephant Castle for quite a while. So when we reopened one, we're reopening one into an open market. There's going to be a lot of demand for it. We know that. But we didn't have that history of continuity of provision that we've got here at the Seven Islands. We think it's important to maintain that where it's already in place.
Any other questions at this stage? Okay, carry on.
Okay, I'm moving on to part 2. This is where we look at refurbishment, first of all. I'm just going to touch on that.
Sorry, John.
Sorry.
Sorry, Joanne. I'm just a little bit confused. Is this the consultation, or? So I thought the whole point of what we asked you to do was consult with residents. So I mean, I appreciate this and it's very interesting, but.
So what I committed and set out to do at the end of the last meeting, or subsequent to the last meeting, was to go back and look at all the other sites, make sure that we've absolutely got this correct, come back to this committee this evening, report back on what we've found, report that back, and then that will inform the full consultation that will take place. There's following this meeting, the IDM, any recommendations that you then make I'll then consider. I then remake the IDM. There's then the usual 5-day public representation period, and then the decision is then implementable. and then we'll go to the full public consultation. And the consultation pack, which will be used for local residents and people in the wider area, will be based on this presentation this evening. It will have more information in it, with more commentary, because obviously when it's put up online, John won't be there to narrate it for people looking at it.
So while we're listening to what John's saying, we need to put our minds in, is this what residents will want to be consulted about? Are there extra things that we should be suggesting?
Indeed, and this is what I was going to wrap up with at the end when John's finished the presentation, is that for the public consultation we'll do basically whatever local residents or yourselves ask us to do to make sure the consultation is as full and as meaningful as possible.
So for the residents who are here in the room, if they can be thinking, is there anything that's missing from this when it goes out to consultation?
Indeed. And because we'll have the period of public representation, and before the consultation starts, we can share the consultation slides with members of the committee, and if there's any particular points, let us know. And that also goes for residents that I met yesterday and anybody else in the local area. Anything specific you'd like us to have covered in the consultation,
I suppose at that point then, just the one point about the brief is, I think you're making a few assumptions about what residents might want. So the point about not having a break in service and stuff, actually I would have thought that was a question, do people mind it being closed for a while if they end up with something better in a better location?
I think in the recommendations that were made from yourselves at the last meeting on point 4, that the consultation should include space for additional comments and suggestions to be put forward. I've already accepted that, so if people do want to raise those points, then absolutely we'll consider those as part of the consultation.
I suppose just the point I'm trying to make is be careful that you're not making assumptions about what people want and not kind of saying that's a given. Actually, I would have thought that people may have differing views on.
And we expect a whole range of views to come forward as part of the consultation.
Okay. Thanks. Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, part 2 is where we consider how we might apply the brief that I've outlined in the context of a refurbishment of the existing Seven Islands, which has been an issue that's been raised by residents and others. Secondly, we look at it, whether we could reconfigure it and extend it as well. So the first slide, which says existing centre, is just a reminder. I'm sure we're all familiar with where it is, but it is a reminder as well, I think, that like all parts of this part of the borough, it's a very constrained site. There's a lot of residential properties adjoining it. It's a busy road. That gives rise to some access issues as well and constraints. So if I flip over to the slide marked repairs and improvements, this is where we summarise in here some of the issues that arise from the existing building's fabric and its age. Building is over 40 years old. You see on the left hand side, I think quite useful aerial photograph of the centre with the on the left hand side as you look at it, the pool, the green space in the middle, and on the right hand side the kind of small sports hall. So it's over 40 years. Survey work that we've done that shows it's in poor condition. Inspection of the structure in 2013 identified a number of issues. You've all got it in front of you. I don't think I need to run through all those, but they're quite substantial issues to do with the fabric, including asbestos potentially within the concrete structure itself. We would need to do much further intrusive surveys to fully understand all that risk, but we know from other buildings in the borough and elsewhere that once you get into that fabric, some of these issues are going to get even more costly than we think they are at the moment. It didn't, as a report on the condition of the non-structural elements, but we anticipate, based on our survey work and understanding of it, that large parts of the basic fabric, the doors, the windows, the cladding, the coverings, ceilings and finishes will all need to be overhauled as well. And then, of course, on top of all that, once you start to do all this, you need to bring it up to and implement it in accordance with modern standards. So we've still got the challenges of DDA, thermal efficiency, means of escape, and we need to ensure it meets Sports England's guidance as well. Based on that's just to get you to a point where you've got a building which is just about fit for purpose. You're talking, we think, a cost estimate of around £8 million. And at that point, you've not improved the offer at all. You've not done anything to improve the sports hall, increase the gym or anything. So you're talking about an £8 million minimum repair cost. And as I say, I think experience to date suggests that once you do the intrusive surveys, you're going to uncover more difficult problems as well on top of it all. So on the second page, just summarise some of those shortfalls. Having spent that, you've still got a sports hall that's approximately a third of the proposed size in the brief. The gym can only accommodate about 50 stations as opposed to the 150 stations that we're looking for. There's only one exercise studio rather than 3 that we think is needed to meet demand. The main pool hall, it would still be the 8 lanes. It wouldn't be the 8 lanes as proposed. It would be the 6 lanes. And we've got a disused learner pool, which is below Sport England standards and requirements. And there's no space at surface level for disabled cars. Sorry. So you end up with quite a large amount of investment, and you really have still got a compromised brief. So over the page, onto what's titled Reconfiguration and Extension. We look in this option at how you then could start to add to the facility. Essentially, and apologies if this is a little harder to follow, if you remember back to the photograph of the existing facility, what we're really proposing in this is that you effectively keep the swimming pool in situ, and what you then do is knock down the low-rise sports hall and develop on that area of it. So you develop on the green space to provide yourself, as you can see on the second diagram on the left, you start to provide yourself with a better reception area, some studio spaces. You could have an undercroft where you could get some disabled car parking spaces, and above that you provide yourself a sports hall. So this is a very substantial remodelling of the site. In effect, you're ripping most of the things out and you're replacing the fabric anyway. So it's going to be quite a costly solution. And what we are concluding from this, I'll get myself to the right page. Yeah, I'm on the right one now. I'm getting myself confused. Apologies, Chair.
It's all right, don't worry. Take your time. Sure, of course.
Yeah, but that's on the refurbishment one, isn't it? I'm on that one. That's one. I'm on that one. I'm going to my conclusions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Apologies for that.
Okay.
We get a solution where we haven't met the full brief. We're under providing, as it says there, in certain key areas. The pool area is still not what we're looking for. Pool changing facilities aren't there, and the gym is way too small. But as you can see from those figures, we're over-providing in areas where we really don't need to be over-providing. That's the circulation space, that's the plant areas. If we're able to redevelop the site in full, you can get yourself a more efficient solution whereby those kind of areas are allocated for actual leisure offer. So you're spending a lot of money under this option. You're not getting the brief that we want, and we're not getting a very efficient or optimal outcome. We think as well, as you can see from that massing drawing, that you're really going to have to build out 100% site coverage. There's very little room, very little flex for any adaptations. There's a lot of planning risk, we would suggest, with that. You're going to have to build right to the edge of properties and pile the consequence. So it's not an easy technical solution. There'll be buildability issues that run with that. And inevitably, you're going to have to close some parts of the centre while you do it. Admittedly, you could phase it. You could keep open your swimming pool while you redevelop the other part of it, and then you could switch back over. But that will make the build programme longer, and it will make the costs higher. We think, based on evidence from other projects, and I'm sure Peter would answer questions on this, that you're getting close to £18 million by the time you've done this kind of solution, which is not far off what's costing us to do a brand new leisure centre at the Elephant Castle. And you haven't met your brief. That's our conclusions on that one. So we'll pause at that point for questions on that section.
Rebecca.
On the redevelopment of the existing centre, you haven't got any kind of timescales in terms of that. So do you know how long it would be if you were just going to redevelop what's already there? And also, what kind of lifetime would you expect there to be on it? Because presumably, even if you redid it, you'd soon again see defects, because actually you were just redeveloping.
So for the refurb and potentially reconfiguring.
Exactly. Yeah, not necessarily on the reconfiguration, just on the refurb.
We think 18 months to 24 months to carry out all that work. That's what we're saying.
Okay, but then presumably it wouldn't have that long a lifetime before you would carry on doing patchwork on it. So actually,
well, it isn't patchwork. I mean, some of the work is quite extensive. Yeah. So you would definitely give it another 15 to 20 years.
Okay.
But there are certain things like the pool tank which we're reusing there, which has a lifespan anyway. So it's complicated work, and it's also in projects, as John has said, a similar one in Dartford on the same age building that we've done. It's difficult to actually ascertain the costs at a very early stage, because you find things like asbestos in the cement, in the concrete, which gives it real big problems. So it's an elongated programme, and it's additional costs for not meeting the real requirement.
Okay. Can I just ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
So you think you get another 15 to 20 years. What would you get if you redesigned the existing leisure centre, and what would we get under a new leisure centre?
There's a minimum 25-year lifespan on all buildings of this nature. It's a very corrosive atmosphere in the swimming pools, but it's a minimum of 25 years on that. So you, in spending that amount of money, you know, there is a definite benefit in that. Can I just add one point?
Yeah,
the existing centre is very unfriendly to disabled users and elderly users because it's raised up. So if we're looking at it, we would have to reconfigure the whole of the inside, and that's where the circulation increases on it. In a new build, you don't have that problem.
Okay.
And so what would you expect the lifetime centre for a brand new leisure centre to be? The same as the refurb one? So
slightly longer, 25 to 30 years.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Johnson?
Slightly follows on from that actually. It would be good, or it would be good to hear your thoughts in terms of how you could incorporate capacity. So how many people would be attending, or how many people it would be able to accommodate if refurbished as opposed to a new leisure centre. And I know you've just mentioned, I believe it was Peter, you just mentioned the current building not necessarily being disability friendly. What would the changes mean to capacity in terms of enhanced, or is it decreased? It would be interesting to see that in terms of people and capacity and numbers, if that makes sense.
If it's a new building on the site, then your capacity will increase because you're putting more emphasis into the pools are bigger, so we've got greater capacity to service the public. And so you're restricted on the present Seven Islands site if you retain the pool tanks on pure numbers going through it. And also we've shown that the Seven Islands site does not give us the same size gym, which is where a lot of members are attracted to, and we're restricted to about 50 stations rather than 150 stations. So building new and making it more disabled and access friendly means that you will increase the numbers on that. And as a general principle, in the leisure centres we've built in London and around the UK, the increase in the public using it has increased by a substantial amount. And I think you've got some figures on usage as well, on Tara as on.
Yeah, basically we asked neighbouring boroughs, and Glassmill, for example, in Lewisham, they welcomed 400,000 visits in the last year. At Dulwich, one of our own leisure centres, we welcomed 360,000 visits. At Peckham Pulse, we welcomed 390,000 visits, but in comparison, at Seven Islands Leisure Centre last year, we welcomed 150,000 visits. So we would considerably increase, and with policies and initiatives such as the free swim and gym, that would increase participation in physical activity considerably.
Would it be quite difficult to be able to project what the increase will mean in terms of people actually footfall through the door, or in terms of having a new centre as opposed to, because I think it would help in terms of the consultation, focus minds in terms of, this is how many new people, in terms of this how many new people will be able to be able to use facilities, and this is a demographic in terms of that.
You can do that. You've got the information to bring that out.
Okay, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. Just it's quite a small point really, but I just noticed on the first set of plans you looked at from the elephant, I didn't see anything there about accessible parking, but in the second proposal you've made quite a lot. It's been mentioned a few times about that would take up some space on the existing site. Is there something about the existing site that means that that's a more pressing concern there, or is that something that could free up a bit more space here if that wasn't required, if there was good access, etc.
It is that constrained nature of the site. At the castle, you've got that area between the actual leisure centre and the elephant, and you've got some room around the sides of it as well in order to provide. I can't remember if we provide how many.
We believe there are 6 disabled or accessible parking spaces.
Well, they're all at surface level.
But they're separate to the
Yeah, but they're all
Right.
Yeah. They're all within the sort of walking distance that you have to meet in order to secure planning consent. There's sorry, I can't remember the figure, but you have to keep your spaces at surface level within a certain distance.
Yeah, it's 40 metres.
40 metres, thank you, Peter. Thank you, 40 metres. So they conform with all that.
Jasmine.
Yeah, just a question on the financial sustainability, really, because, all your presentation points to, the benefits quite clearly of a new build, but, in this climate of doing more with less, you did mention in your presentation about it bringing money in, but then we've also got the free swim and gym, really, so I'm just wondering how that stacks up, if you don't mind answering that.
So there'll be significantly increased usage and footfall of the centre, which will obviously generate more funds. Another advantage with a new building is you can design them to much higher specifications from the point of energy efficiency, from maintenance and running costs. Using another example, Camberwell Library, which is going to open in a couple of weeks. The way Camberwell Library has been designed for usage compared to the shop fronts on Camberwell Church Street is it's going to save significant amounts of money on cleaning and maintenance because of the way the building's designed compared to the current provision. So you can design those things in from the outset to make them more efficient to run and operate from a revenue point of view. On the free gyms and swims policy itself, we've obviously got the trial at the moment for under 18s and over 60s. And that will be rolled out fully across the borough kind of mid next year, and we're currently also out to tender for re-provision for our provider from Fusion, and potentially Fusion again, who knows, and part of that will be hopefully extending the offer further from the current hours that are offered, but we won't know that until next year.
Okay, thank you.
We have Tara wants to
Thank you.
Okay. I didn't see who was first. Sorry, Paul was first.
Paul was first.
I think I'm a bit frightened that I've missed something, or that I'm being a bit thick. But on the most radical proposal for the redevelopment of the existing site, you are still retaining the pools. Why is there not is there not a slightly more radical proposal, which is just get rid of all of it?
Coming to that,
we're coming on to that next. That's next.
Yes, I just wanted to return to Jasmine's point about the free swimming and gym, because I appreciate that maintenance costs will be greatly reduced, so there'll be sort of cost savings in that. But I don't understand how you're going to raise revenue from having extra gym equipment and gym space and studio space, and swimming pool space if people aren't paying for it. How are you raising the revenue?
So as Tara said, there's currently 150,000 visitors each year to Seven Islands. Currently, with an significantly expanded offer, we'd expect that to hit around 400,000 visits a year, so more than doubling footfall. The current free gym and swim offer and pilot is for certain sessions. It's not 24/7. It's not 7 days a week. It's on Fridays and Saturday afternoons and Sunday afternoons. What the final free gym and swim offer looks like, we won't know until kind of middle of next year. It's linked to the re-tender we're currently going through for provider for all of our leisure centres, and what we're hoping that comes out through the re-tender process is through that competitive bidding that we get an expansion of the offer, but we won't know until that process has come to a conclusion. Ideally, as a borough, we'd have the resources and we'd have enough money to make free gym and swim 7 days a week, because we believe it's a universal service that can help break down the barriers to inactivity and tackle the significant public health challenges our borough faces. You know the stats about around obesity. A quarter of our 11-year-olds are obese, another quarter are overweight. We've got a significant proportion of our adult population are obese. It's bad for their individual health and well-being. It's huge costs for the NHS, and there'll be huge costs for us as a local authority in future years. All those people who are currently overweight and obese continue to be so when we have to provide adult social care.
Okay, so if we're going to move on to the rest of the presentation now.
Because we don't have the funds for it.
Good. Okay. Let's go on to the next stage of the presentation.
Okay, we'll move on to part 3 when we look at sites outside the emerging town centre. The 3 of those. Seven Islands is the first one of those. Then we'll look at Rotherhithe Police Station site and finally the water sports site at Greenland Dock. So if we look at the slide marked redevelop Seven Islands Leisure Centre site, on the left-hand side you've got an indicative layout of a new leisure building, and you can see from that we are able to accommodate the brief if you were to close and demolish it and rebuild it. However, we've got some issues with it. We don't think we'll be able to provide any off-street disabled car parking at surface level, and we certainly wouldn't be able to provide the servicing of the leisure centre off-site, and that would be a kind of planning requirement. So that servicing would have to take place in the road. It does at the moment, actually, but ideally you'd like to get to a situation where you can get the servicing, the cleaning of the tanks and all that to take place within the footprint of the actual site, and you can't do that on. And I think that shows that if you turn over, the reason for that is that, as with the kind of reconfiguration and extension option, you've got 100% site coverage in order to achieve that brief. There really is, again, no room for the manoeuvre on that. In fact, if you look at the frontage onto Lower Road, you can see that we're starting to extend into the kind of slip road area as well, and taking it very close to those residential properties that front onto Rotherhithe Road. So it's going to be,
Lower Road.
Onto Lower Road, pardon. So there's going to be some implications there for neighbours and residents, undoubtedly. As I said, no accessible parking bays on site at ground level. We'd have to close this undoubtedly there'll be a loss of service provision. We think for at least 18 to 24 months while it's constructed. It's going to be difficult to construct. You've got to think about site compound, site setup, about how you do your deliveries into a site like that off what is effectively a TfL road. It can be done, but undoubtedly it'll extend a period of time, and there'll be additional costs associated with doing that. So we conclude that while it can be done, it's not an ideal solution, and it does mean closing, obviously, the facility and a loss of leisure facilities in the area. I'm going to go through these three options, Jeff. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
Moving on to the redevelopment of the Rotherhithe Police Station. I think we know where that one is, I assume. It's just marked on there. It's not, I think the important thing to note here is it's not in the council's ownership. The area marked in red is the bit that will come forward for disposal by the police authority. If you look over the page, we haven't done a great deal of work on this. I don't think there's any need to, because as you can see, we've just marked up two of the key components of the leisure centre. In blue, you've got your pool and changing area, and in green, you've got your sports hall. And clearly, there's not enough site available to us there. We'd have to acquire a lot more land to do that, with all the cost and difficulty of doing that, given it's all residential that we'd have to acquire. So we don't propose that we look any further at that one. Moving on to the third site, marked Greenland Dock. At the moment, the site is occupied by our water sports centre, which we think is a good facility, a facility we want to keep. It's a facility that we invested £2.3 million into in 2009. It offers a rather unique offer. So any redevelopment of that site would need to incorporate that facility. If you turn over the page to the one marked redevelop Greenland Dock site, that just shows you the current boundary of the site. It's got a lot of boat storage, as well as that the facility itself, some car parking provision, and it's got residential properties next to it. On the next page, you can see what happens when we start to drop the leisure centre onto that site, including a re-provided water sports centre. It's simply not big enough. We'd have to acquire adjoining land in the form of the residential car park and council ownership. We think that, coupled with the fact that this isn't great in terms of the catchment area, it's not particularly well served by public transport, means that we should omit this one as an option. So that's the end of part three.
And also as well, it's important to remember that the Water Sports Centre had some recent investment.
Yeah, I mentioned that.
7 years
the
ago.
2.3 million that we've sorry, Mark. Yeah, I
Back
mentioned
in 2009.
2009.
So it's recently invested in as a facility.
So that's the end of that part three. If you want to take any questions on those options.
Just on, can I just add one point on the green and on the Water Sports Centre? It was in the paper last week, and it's been raised with me by a couple of people about this proposal for a floating swimming pool / Lido in Greenland Dock. It's not something that we support as a council. We don't think it's feasible. We don't think it can work. So just in case there's any questions on that, it's not something that we're supporting as an authority. It's somebody else's. A third party has put in a planning application for a piece of our, well, part of the dock, which is in the council's ownership, and we don't support it, so that's less than helpful. Okay. Fair to say.
I'm struggling with the concept of a floating swimming pool. It's kind of, no, that's it. Okay, I've got a few questions on this. So I've got 4 people indicating. I'll limit it at that, if that's okay, but for reasons of time. So Maisie first.
Thank you. My question is on the plans for the build diagram, the redevelopment of the 7 Island site completely. I understand what you mean about there not being any accessible parking spaces on street level. What would be in that basement? I can see it says plant, and then there just seems to be a really big area, and I was just wondering, why is there nothing in there, and why couldn't you provide accessible parking in a basement?
Obviously, you could provide it. You could provide something here, but the actual structural implications of it and the cost of it, because obviously underneath the pools, that's restricted area full stop. And so we're going down, digging down even further into the ground. It's usually very expensive to build car parking underground, and will push the cost of it higher and higher. But it's actually the entrance off Lower Road, there is one at the far end at the moment, which used to be the old police station, I believe, or connected to the old police station. But it is a difficult access to come out on that major trunk road there. So it's not ideal, I think, is the result.
There's also obviously the option of removing some of the residents' car parking from Gom Road, but we know there's severe parking pressures there at the moment. There's been calls for a CPC, so we don't think that would be a good option either for the local residents to lose 6 spaces.
So just to clarify then, is the major concern about using the basement, is it that the access is dangerous, or is it because the
access is not good?
Could you not do a different access?
But then we would eat into the site, so there would be a slip road off the site, which would reduce the footprint of the building, which would push it back, which would mean that we couldn't fit on something else. It really takes up 100% of the site and loses that green space.
Okay, Paul. It's very much in a similar vein, and I suppose my question is this: I understand why there are quite sort of vague, sketchy dismissals of the idea of doing it on the police station and Greenland Dock. I get all that, but the redevelopment of the Seven Islands site, considering the amount of work and alternative options that were put into the partial refurbishment, I mean, a range of other options: building higher, building lower, faffing around with the configuration, looking at the wider road layout, looking at the way that it works, trying to make broader configurations in order to really stretch every possible option. Because actually, I mean, it's within licking distance of doing what we wanted to do. It's just there are some reasonable obstacles. But I mean, it will be interesting to see some more detailed plans about the proposals that remove those obstacles and what we then lose. Because at the minute, it does seem to be a degree of supposition about what removing those obstacles would mean for the site, because presumably it can be done in a variety of different ways.
I think one of the important things is that it's, we can get on there pretty much everything that we need from a service point of view. It would be 100% of the site, as John mentioned, which makes it very constrained to actually build a site compound on there. It would have to pile right up next to people's residential properties, which is less than ideal. There's the disabled access that's been mentioned, but for me, even if we could solve each of those individual problems, there's still a big, huge issue, which is we would end up with loss of leisure centre provision in the area for around about 2 years. If there are any delays through the demolition process, if there's asbestos, etc., through the construction process, if we find something under there that we're not expecting, then that could delay the process, and it would mean that at least 2 years we wouldn't have a leisure centre in the area.
So that 2 year figure is a minimum. Is it that, so it could be longer?
Yeah, it depends on the form of construction. And we don't think, particularly, if the life of these things is 25 to 30 years. If it was gone for 2 to 3 years, that's 10% of the lifetime of the building. When it's not available, then you've got 2 to 3 years, if not more, of people not being able to use the.
But again,
centre.
And I get that, and I think that I'd include that as part of the one. There's clearly significant obstacles to doing it. But I think bearing in mind how much work goes into looking at the partial redevelopment. Now, whether we could perhaps again, how would one phase the demolition and construction, and how it would work and so on, are all I think reasonably detailed questions, which within this are not addressed.
I'd just add that we have with Peter looked at different options for how you might stack this. There isn't a solution we've come up with yet which doesn't take 100% coverage of the site. Now we can pull all that into the consultation, but I think in all those options you're looking at the closure of the facility. There's no way in which you could phase this and still allow a partial use of it.
I think it's useful.
But we can draw that out in the consultation by all means.
Because on my reading of it, that what seems to be a relatively common sense solution, which is build a new leisure centre where there's one already, is dismissed along the same lines as let's build one on a plot which the council doesn't own that isn't big enough. And they're not equivalent options. And I'm not saying that it is necessarily possible. I'm not doubting your technical expertise on it, but
you're saying there's a hierarchy of plausibility. There is a hierarchy of plausibility, which is a phrase I've wanted to use for many years. Thanks for giving me
we can put that information in the consultation.
Might I suggest, Paul, that you have a think about the wording of a recommendation to cover off that issue later.
It gets in the...
Yes, so, Johnson.
Yeah. Question actually follows on from that actually, which was, is this the proposed format of the consultation presentation essentially? Would it be in 4 parts?
So what we're proposing is obviously subject to feedback from yourselves and members of the public, is to for the consultation, certainly in the early stages, to run through it in this format which we should have done when we came to ask last time, to set out and let people understand what the brief is that we've set out and why we're doing what we're doing and what we want to achieve for the area and the kind of sports provision that we want for the area. Then the option of refurbing and reconfiguring Seven Islands, which is the next logical step. Then demolition on Seven Islands itself, the police station site and the sports centre, and then what we're about to move on to, which is those sites within the proposed town centre, to take people on the same journey that we've been on as a council as we've been working this proposal up, and take people through that and answer any questions, and hopefully then the consultation can be as well informed as possible.
Yeah, because to address Paul's point, and possibly might be something we look at in the recommendation, do we think it might help the consultation in terms of looking at the redevelopment of Seven Islands Centre as part of the second part, and then looking at Seven Islands as a whole in terms of extension and renovation as well as redevelopment?
Yeah, absolutely, and you know the recommendations that one of the recommendations I agreed to earlier, which is will include all the options that we considered, that'll be in there. So yeah.
Thanks very much. I mean, firstly, I just saying to Jasmine, it does feel like there has been some real progress in that this is a conversation about different options, not just here's a preferred site announced in August, and actually thank you very much for being willing to listen to what members of this committee suggested. I think there is still a danger, just from the tone of it, is consultation isn't just a way you get everyone to buy into where you want to end up with. Actually, it has to be a genuine two-way process where you're willing to listen and engage with people. And I just feel a bit, as Paul's point about the way one option's dismissed, it just feels a little bit like you still know where you want to get to, and your kind of wariness about accepting the second recommendation was saying, if loads of people think differently, will you change your mind? And I just think there needs to be look, if this is a genuine consultation, then we need to not be pushing it in one way or another and really trying not to dismiss options. That's not a question, it's just a point.
I think what would be helpful is I can pick that from in the closing remarks when we've finished.
That's fine. I just feel, I have I have a council group that I try and lead, and sometimes I have an idea of where I want to get them to, and we have a consultation, but sometimes we know and sometimes we don't. So I'm just saying that, if you're going to do this, genuinely do it properly, and please, don't just dismiss options without listening to what people have to say. And I suppose for us here, the purpose of this item isn't for us to give you views on which of the options we think is best or not, but to try and make sure that the community has a genuine chance to do that. And so I suppose building on Paul's point about why the knocking Seven Islands down and redeveloping it isn't explored further, I just wondered, I can't see anything here about the cost of that. I mean, you say additional cost, but actually, do you know anything more tonight about how much that option would cost? I was going to say, I did a bit of research, and Walden Forest has done something for much less than that. I've got a couple of other examples.
That's a slightly different building because we're the architects for it.
Oh, okay. How much did that cost?
Sorry.
This is a monopoly. This is our next scrutiny, the monopoly of
it's more in the region of 18 million, but also there are some very large external play areas which are not part of the building. It's open to the elements in certain parts of the building. So it is a different type of building to provide.
Have you got
I can let you have some details.
Yeah, well, and any others, because there were certainly a few that I found that seemed to be actually cheaper than doing a brand new one, or about the same price, which was so I think certainly if the consultation could talk a bit more about costs in this option. And the other thing, and again, I'm not saying whether I think it's a particularly good idea or not, but have you explored going up one more storey on the existing site? Because obviously then you could make it a bit narrower.
Yeah, but we can put that into the consultation. We haven't explored that.
Yep.
And does that not solve some of your problems about parking down the side or servicing?
Can I just say on going up in stories, and this is what we've done on Elephant and Castle to put it on a restricted site, is that gives an awful lot of operational difficulties in actually how you run it. It increases a lot of the circulation around the building, and it costs more basically to go higher, and discourages people in going deeper into the building. So we try not to stack things, apart from the structural element of it. You know,
but having said that,
sorry.
but having said that, we have looked at the stacking option,
yes.
But you still end up with the 100% site coverage. It doesn't necessarily help with the issues that you've raised, but we can put that into the consultation.
Yeah,
so
some more around cost and some more around actually different ways of configuring it.
Yeah, we can do.
In my mind, the further you go up, the less you have to go out.
You should have less at the bottom. It doesn't always work that way. Yeah.
Well, we're not architects.
Okay, last one on this section, then we'll move on with the presentation. Ada.
Thanks. It might be the maddest suggestion of the night, but is
floating leisure centre.
Is it? Yes, absolutely. Is it prohibitively expensive to think about splitting it across the two sites and actually buying the police station site and building part of it on there and building it? I mean, is that just?
And having one of those
would that be so mad?
And having a gladiators travelling.
I know lower roads are really busy roads.
I think that I'm not sure what Tara would say, but my view of that is I don't think we'd want to split people that may, have a swim or use a sports hall and go for a swim or use different facilities there, the creche, the changing rooms, and splitting those with a major TfL trunk road. I think the phrase is suboptimal. Is that right,
There's some great phrases coming out of this.
Tara thinks it's a good phrase.
Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. We're
we want to consider all options.
Over to you.
Okay, move on to the final part 4. These are options within the proposed town centre, the emerging town centre. There's a few slides here at the beginning that try to set some of the emerging context, because clearly, if you look at what we've got there at the moment, a large car park, the shopping centre, it's hard to envisage how you start to put a new leisure centre into that context. So the first of the slide is just to refresh everybody's memory about land ownership. As we said in one of our site criteria, that it's important the council has freehold ownership of it. Those plots there marked in the kind of salmon, red, pink, whatever you want to call them, they are the ones where the council has a freehold interest. The Surrey Quays Leisure Park site, for example, acquired by British Land, not in the council's ownership. So even though it will come forward for redevelopment, we don't have a land ownership stake in that. So we're looking for a site within those kind of pink areas. Moving on to phasing, we talked about at the beginning of one of our important site criteria is that we identify a site that could be available for development within a kind of 5-year window. That means that we're looking for a site within phase 1 of what is a very large scheme, because we're talking probably a development that's going to take place over 15 to 20 years. What you've got there is plots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. They're the first phase of this emerging town centre. When we talk about our first phase, what do we mean by that and why that area? We're looking for something that's a meaningful start on site as a council, because we have an interest in generating a viable, strong scheme. It's going to start to generate some income and returns to the council, so we want it to be meaningful.
And put Canada Walk on the map.
Start to build it as a place. It's obviously plots around Canada Water Basin itself. We all know that Decathlon the redevelopment is now underway, so these plots will start to finish development around the basin and start to establish a place. So it needs to come within those early phases. This is also where we're starting. We hope to establish the new kind of high street that begins to link the two tube stations. So this is going to become the start of the scheme, and it's important we get that leisure centre, we think, in that area, because that is where we've got the opportunity in the next 5 years. If I move on to the next one, which talks about constraints, there are some constraints on how these early plots will be developed. There's a couple that we need to mention. One everybody I think has touched on in the past is the London Overground Tunnel. That's marked in red. As you can see, it clips the edge of plot 6, it runs under plots 3, 2 and along the edge of plots 1. So it is a constraint for quite a significant part of phase 1, and not just for the site that we're going to suggest is our preferred site for a leisure centre. The second constraint on there is the what's known as the viewing corridor. London Views Management Framework establishes a viewing corridor from Greenwich Park through to St Paul's. The area marked in orange on there is one where you cannot build above 30 metres in height. As we're already about 5 metres above sea level within that area, effectively you can't put anything above about 6 stories in residential height within there. So that's quite a constraint. It means if you do want height, you're looking at plots outside of that area, plots 1, plots 4, plots 5, the ones where you can start to get a bit more height and start to generate a bit more value as a consequence, start to establish a town centre and some substantial buildings.
And I think also as well, in addition to the value that John mentioned, it's about getting, building many more new homes for the area. It's about having business space there, bringing jobs to the area. So there's a number of things to be considered in that, in addition to the value.
Yeah. On the next one, entitled Phase 1 Design Aims, just touched upon some of the kind of principles that need to be borne in mind in these early plots. We're trying to establish a place, trying to establish one that's going to work well, and deliver on the things that Councillor Williams just touched on there. Start to be a sufficient scale to start to generate funds that can support new council homes and jobs. So what we're showing there is plots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are plots which really do need to have retail in them at the ground floor level, that you're starting to establish that new town centre. They need to be active frontages all the way around, so they need to have activity all the way around in order to start to animate the place and start to draw people into them to make this a successful environment. And one of the problems with a leisure centre building, potential problems with it, is that you can't have animation on all 4 sides of it. If you go and look at the Elephant Castle the Castle Leisure Centre, you'll see that you start to have some quite substantial blank frontages to them, because inevitably you've got plant and equipment, you've got pools, and you just can't have windows into those areas. So, and you've got the sports hall. The sports hall doesn't have large windows in it, essentially. So you inevitably with a leisure centre, you're going to have some large area of void, solid frontage. Blank walls. Yeah, for want of a better word. Blank walls. So that's an issue, I think, when you come to try to think about where it might go in here. And then finally, there's a couple of other design ambitions in here. One is, as I said, to establish that town centre, a clear route that links your 2 tube stations that carry the water through to Surrey Quays. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Yeah, and we're also trying to create linkages between the two big open spaces, so that Park on that western side through to Brushy Dock Woodland in the eastern side. Those are some of the design principles we're trying to establish there.
And the new park.
Well, the new park is in later phases, yeah, but within that early phase, those are some of the features. That's going to context. We're trying to establish a high street. There's going to be activity in it. You're starting to see that this is a place where you could actually start to put a leisure centre. It's not going to be a car park in the future. There will be people coming to it. It is a logical place where you want to put your new public services, and it will be on a busy road, well used, and will give people the accessibility that we would hope it would have. So on the next slides we start to touch on, okay, let's look in a bit more detail about the individual plots and how you might start to think about putting a leisure centre into them. On plot 1, which is the one which is essentially the overflow car park at the moment, you could fit a leisure centre into that. Undoubtedly, it's large enough. We've sketched that out. You can see the pool hall, you can see the forecourt sports centre, there's a learner pool, and you can see how you can start to create a reception area, and with stacking you can get other features into it. So it's possible on there, undoubtedly. But inevitably that would mean that it runs against some of the principles that I've tried to sketch out in those design names. You would lose your retail frontages, you would end up with some solid frontages as a consequence, and you've got the challenge really of how you relate that leisure centre to the residential, which undoubtedly would be above it, and that would be private residential. We think that is going to be a very significant impediment if you wanted to put it there. That's because you've got very complex lease arrangements. You've got a public sector building on the ground, first, third, possibly fourth floors, and then above it you've got private residential with very long leases. That's a solution that isn't frankly going to work for either the council or the private development partner. So what you're looking at really is omitting that residential, and that has some quite significant consequences for the overall financial wherewithal of the early scheme, because you have to think about how you redistribute those residential units elsewhere, and that's not going to be easy.
On the residential over the top, we did it at Swiss Cottage with the affordable units over the top of the main building there, and it caused enormous problems in agreements in sort of what happens if the leisure centre is closed, and then the tenants above it. And I believe Westminster have been involved in the last, I think it's 4 to 5 years, on getting Moberly off the ground there, which is a similar thing where they're putting private residential and affordable residential over the top of a new leisure centre. So they're complex arrangements, and therefore just the leases alone, whether they would fit within the timescale of your first 5 years to get something up and running, complicates the situation. I know that's something that can be overcome, but it's a difficult problem.
Yeah, and I think also as well that there's even if you remove that problem by not having any residential above it, you've obviously got the problem of you don't have the active frontages and the town centre feel. But also by losing that residential on this site, which with the viewing framework and the other constraints is one of the areas where we can go taller, we can have more density, deliver more units, including more private units. That would hit the overall financial makeup and financial model of the negotiation that we're currently having with British Land, and that would cost us an awful lot of new council homes and potentially that ongoing financial return to the council, which is needed to support our services, particularly with the significant reductions in funding we have at the moment. So that's something that's key to consider in addition to the lease constraints and the other problems that have just been outlined.
Okay, so there are some challenges that you can also see. We just noted that you do have to address the tunnel issue, because undoubtedly that plot is over the tunnel. It's possible that you could place your pool in particular somewhere away from it, but there's a bit of a challenge there. And finally, there's a cost, an additional cost for putting residential over a swimming pool. You have to have very large spans in order to do that, which obviously puts additional cost into the scheme. These same issues apply to really plots 2, 3 and 4, so we haven't gone into any great detail on that. We can put that into obviously into the consultation material, but essentially those same constraints and issues apply to those plots 2, 3 and 4 as well. We have just touched upon plot 5. Again, this is a plot that's outside of the viewing corridor, so it's potentially one where you could get some height for residential use. We've just marked up some of the key components within that red line. In theory, you could go beyond the red line and start to build a leisure centre into those other areas, but I would say that one of the things to bear in mind is one of the benefits of tall buildings is the ability to provide some additional open space and public realm around the base of those buildings, because you're effectively getting your units by going further up, so you don't have to spread that at ground level. So you would lose that benefit if you did that, but you still have all the challenges in any case of the ones that we've just outlined for plot 1. So that's plot 5. Moving on then to plot 6, we've shown the red line boundary of the site in its full extent at the moment. We've indicated there that you could, as you can see, incorporate some of those key features that we're looking for: the pool, the forecourt sports hall, and the learner pool. This site does have some characteristics which make it perhaps more suitable for a leisure centre than some of the other plots. Because of its location and its frontage onto Deal Porter Way, it only needs to have an active frontage onto one side of it. As I said, some of the other town centre uses need to be animated on all 4 sides. Here you only need to animate one onto Deal Porter's Way, and a leisure centre does that quite well. There's a level difference that needs to be noted between Hoffield Place and the existing car park. It's about 4.5 metres. Now, a leisure centre, you can start to drop components of a leisure centre into the ground to take advantage of that, and therefore reduce the massing of the building. That's possible. You can't do that with a residential use, for example. You can't make use of it in that same way. So that's a characteristic of this site that perhaps directs it towards a leisure centre. I've touched on the active frontages. It doesn't need to have that on this plot. It is going to be in the future, we think, a well-connected site. Potentially Deal Porter's Way, which will be rerouted, could incorporate a bus service. That's obviously subject to debate with Transport for London. But in any case, it's in reasonable close proximity to both tube stations and to Lower Road itself and the bus route on there. We think that there's the potential to incorporate the the tank room into it without compromising, without having a poor relationship with the tunnel. We think that can be done without too much problem. And finally, it's not in the viewing corridor, or it's only a part of it is. So again, it gives itself to a kind of lower-rise building like a leisure centre. It does, of course, have impacts for residents who live in Hoffield Place and the other residential properties on the boundary. We recognise that. But those are some of the characteristics we think kind of leads you thinking this might be of those early plots suitable for a leisure centre.
And then you've got...
shall I keep going? I can see people got their hand up. Shall I just keep going? Is that okay?
Yeah. Finish off and then
I've only got two more. So
yeah.
The one over the page just starts to give you an axiometric of how you might start to provide the various zones within the leisure centre on the different levels. And on the final one, we give some indication of massing. I do emphasise this isn't architecture at this stage at all. It's a very early massing study designed to assess whether the site has the capacity to accommodate the kind of brief you're looking for. We think that it does accommodate that brief. We think that it is deliverable within that five-year horizon, obviously subject to planning consent and all the other hurdles that one has to overcome with these big schemes. It is a plot that's in council freehold ownership. It would allow us to provide continuity of provision because we could redevelop this site before closing Seven Islands. As I said before, pretty good in terms of accessibility and access to public transport, so good in terms of the catchment area. But we all recognise in all this that there are implications for residents, and we don't fully understand what those are. We're conscious of that because it's an early stage in the process. There are implications for the green area that sits between where this leisure centre would sit and the residents. We need to recognise we need to undertake much more work to understand that and carry out surveys to see whether trees can be retained or not. This is an early design. It needs to be optimised, and I suppose what we're looking for from officers is the ability to get on and do that more detailed work to really test these things and understand them and to see whether we can find means of mitigating those impacts. And we've indicated there, for example, that it's got the potential to drop the massing into the ground to make use of that height, and that you could slope roofs to reduce the massing at the rear of the building.
I think what's really important to stress here is that this is as far as officers have been able to take these proposals at the moment. The IDM that's currently paused will, in addition to allowing the full public consultation to happen and everything that we've discussed this evening, also allows John and the team and Tara and the architects to get in and work up a detailed proposal and look at the site in detail and see what space is actually needed, what the building actually looks like, accommodating a green roof, for example, on the rear slope there, looking at that buffer zone, which is currently that white area between the retaining wall fence and the blue edge there. How big can we get that? I want that to be as big as is humanly possible, to have as much as a buffer between those properties and the leisure centre if we do go forward on this site as possible. If we can maintain and keep the mature trees that are there at the moment, I think that we should try everything we can to keep them. If it's not possible to keep them, depending on where the route networks are, looking at replacing them with semi-mature trees to re-provide that screening as soon as is possible, and looking at if this site can be squeezed and pushed and altered in any other ways to minimise the footprint and minimise that impact on the local residents and have as much of a buffer as possible. At this stage, this is as far as we're able to go, because we need to do that detailed design work to see what's possible. And as part of the consultation, in addition to the consultation with everyone in the area, there'll obviously be more detailed sessions for residents who live in the local area, current users of Seven Islands Leisure Centre, to see what kind of design we can get on this site, to see what we can work up. And that work will be complete before we as a cabinet take a formal decision on whether to proceed with the renegotiated commercial settlement with British Land, including the site for the leisure centre. So that work will be complete before we as a cabinet consider that, and obviously all the consultation responses as well.
Okay, I've got 4 people indicating that what I propose to do now, just so people know, is we'll take these 4 questions, and it will be one question. I'll keep people to that now. and then we will move directly to questions from people who've come along this evening specifically for this item. So get ready to put your hands up when we finish that bit. So I've got Catherine indicating first.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. But I just want to comment that this last section is the most confusing. I think that the slides and the diagrams are really quite baffling initially. I'm afraid that I think you just need to have a revisit each of the diagrams and make sure there's a really clear code and some better description about what you're trying to explain. This is probably
we need more commentary. It'll be in plain English and it'll be taking people through and explaining this in as much detail as possible.
That would be really good. Just things like because the first one, I don't understand what the red dotted line refers to. The second one, you then introduce the plots, but you don't really explain that those are the plots. And
so you have to build it up more.
Yeah, and the kind of viewing corridor which was mentioned in the commentary. So yes, and I do think it is worth having slides for each of plots 2, 3 and 4, even though they're a repeat. And I just wondered as well whether it's worth doing a bit more pros and cons rather than just cons.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll put this in the presentation.
Okay.
Thanks very much. I think that echoes my concern about it being a genuine consultation, and I think it is worth just noting, Chair, that while the Cabinet members saying no decision's been made, the Cabinet papers today propose Seven Islands as a site for new housing, and if a decision hasn't been made yet, then I don't think that should be happening. Sorry, I'm just making the point that that's when the community starts to think something's going wrong when decisions have been made and that the consultation is just a sham. So just to say that that's a concern that's certainly been raised with me today. My question is particularly around what I think is plot 1, which is the overflow car park, the one with the bins in it. Yeah, that's what most people know, is the one with the recycling bins in it.
We'll find a new home for them.
Well, I hope you'll actually really consider this site properly, because I take the point about residential on top, but certainly I've been at a meeting today with Transport for London about putting residential on top of Bermondsey Tube Station, and frankly if they can find a way of doing it on top of a tube station, I don't think it's beyond the wit of man to do it on leisure centres. And in fact the leader of the council, who lives in my ward, lives on top of a swimming pool and a gym in a very nice posh block, and if they can do it in posh blocks, I don't know why they can't do it for council leisure centres.
I think with all due respect, Councillor, I'll summarise having a publicly accessible leisure centre with 400,000 plus visitors a year is very different from private amenity space for people that live in that block itself.
No, it's open to the public actually. It's a public gym and a swimming pool, and it's very well used. And I'm just making the point that it's possible if you want to make it happen. And I'm giving you 2 examples, and I'm sure there's plenty more places where it does work. And I think, again, we just get into the situation where you're giving us all the examples of where it doesn't work, rather than giving us a fair assessment of places it does work as well. My question is around that site of the overflow car park. I don't know why nobody on this committee was shown what I was shown by one of the residents earlier, which was the options appraisal paper from November 2013, where that was the preferred site. And it just seems, and this paper goes on at length, and I think committee members should have been given the courtesy of seeing it. And it gives multiple reasons why this was the perfect site. So I feel slightly, and I mean residents who've shared it with me may want to comment, but I feel a bit offended that we've just had however long, over an hour of presentation. The options appraisal 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago, hasn't been referred to once, and lo and behold, that's a site that was suggesting the overflow car park was the perfect place for lots of reasons. So I don't know. Is AF? The architects we've got here tonight aren't AFLSP. You are. So this was you and Assistant Councillor. So just the point, because I don't think it's fair to other committee members who don't have it in front of them. I suppose my question is, what changed between November 2013 and August 2015?
So I think just to go through the points that you've raised.
Well, no, that was just my only question.
Okay. Well, I think just on the Seven Islands point, just to clarify, I'd like to discuss that with some of the local residents yesterday. Whilst the current Seven Islands site, we are considering it, if we go forward with moving Seven Islands somewhere else, for that site to come forward for a mixture of new private homes, which will fund new intermediate homes, discounted market rent for key workers, plus new council homes. We had one initial consultation meeting with local residents to see what they thought about that proposal. The feedback we received, and I've written to, or the housing regeneration team have written to all residents of that part of Lower Road and Moss Way and Gom Road, to confirm that the main worry people had was opening up a 24/7 accessible route through the back of their properties on Gom Road through into Southwark Park, and we've committed that will not happen. The other thing that we've committed as well is that there'll be further consultation before anything happens on that site, and obviously we have to decide what happens if Seven Islands stays there, or we refurb it, or rebuild there. Obviously that site will not come forward because we can't build two things on the same plot of land.
And moving on to the options appraisal from 2013.
So what's changed in the last 2 years, and John might want to touch on this as well, in the last 2 years the scale of ambition at Canada Water has massively altered. A lot of that changed following the planning decision around the cellar development. That made British Land look at the site again, see what was possible, and rather than what we'd previously said, and apologies to British Land who are sat in the room, don't wish to be rude, what we thought was a rather piecemeal approach to improving the Surrey Quays shopping centre site. We want to build a brand new town centre, and that's what's changed. In addition, British Land have acquired and bought the Mass Leisure Centre Park site, which is enabling us in partnership with them to properly design and redesign this whole area to move away from the car parks, etc., and have a brand new thriving town centre that will have considerable number of new homes, new council homes, considerable level of new employment, new cultural venue, and all the rest of it. And that's what has changed in the last 2 years, the scale of ambition of what's going to come forward here.
It says here the leisure centre can fit, so you haven't changed the ambition.
Could I just comment?
I just want to answer on that specific point, and then I'm going to move on to the other people who've asked questions.
Yeah, absolutely. At the point in time which that was done, the negotiations with British Land was solely in respect to the printing work site. So the big thing that's changed since that was undertaken is that the shopping centre site has come into play. So when we were considering that, it was I'm sorry, I'm trying to finish answer the question. Yes. I take the point that there's been made that we need to make more of the pros and cons, and I'm not saying there aren't pros that go with this site, and some of the ones that are in there are still relevant. But at the time when that was done, British Land were not proposing to bring forward a comprehensive redevelopment of all that area and to start the process of forming a new town centre. So that's the significant change.
Okay.
So there are still some pros with it, I agree.
It's considering everything.
Right, I'm going to go to Maisie's question now.
I don't feel like in this set of papers there's enough detail on various different options that could be put forward in the different sites, because I guess some have been mentioned here already, but those of us that travel around outside of our borough from time to time know that there's millions of different ways you can configure leisure centres, and we see them all the time. You know, you only have to go to Elephant, so you can combine a tower which pays for a leisure centre. I don't know why, for example, on plot 5 you couldn't combine a tower because it's out of the viewing platform with a leisure centre, for example. And also I think, I might be wrong, but in Streatham I think they've combined a supermarket with a leisure centre, am I right? I think they might have done anyway. But those kind of things, when that goes up for public consultation, that's what's going to be going through people's minds. So I think those things need to be fleshed out a little bit more, rather than just kind of assuming one leisure centre on the site and that's it.
So we'll have, as for the ones that have already been mentioned, we'll have the different options on there that we've considered. And we'll also go into a bit more detail, and maybe on the slide where we're talking about the elephant, the castle, we can talk about the way that the castle's been designed as a separate building to the tower that's funding it, and the considerations there, just to make it clear, because obviously that's something that'll be in people's mind as well. So yeah, we can include that.
But just to follow up, plot 5, could that have a tower and a leisure centre on it?
We'll have to look at that one, but I don't see what
Because I don't know why it's only half shaded red, but it looks quite big compared to the other ones. So I was just thinking, couldn't we just put that on there, and then you'd get both your big building, and you could also have a glass side to the leisure centre like they have in Cambridge, so it's actually very active frontage, even though it's also a swimming pool.
I think that we can certainly consider that. We can put information there. I mean, what we've done at the castle with the leisure centre is we don't want. There's screens everywhere because some people don't want people walking past to look in them having to swim, and there's various sensitivities there. Yeah. But no, that's something we can flesh out in a pod. It's something we can put more detail on in the consultation.
Okay. Paul.
Just again, very similar to Maisie's point. At the end of plot 1, we say it's the same issues with plots 2, 3, and 4. I can get how it's the same issues with plots 2 and 3. I don't understand how it's the same issues with plot 4. Which seems to be substantially different in terms of the area that it surrounds, how much it's into the vision corridor thing, nowhere near the tunnel. It's quite a different spot.
We'll have full detail on the pros and the cons for plot 4. It's also important to remember that plot 4, if you're to have a leisure centre, then we'll put this in the consultation. If you're to have the front of the leisure centre, for argument's sake, fronting onto Cannes Water Basin itself, you then have 3 significant frontages onto 2 new public squares and onto the main shopping centre area. The new town centre area itself would be kind of blank wall dead frontage. But that's something we can go into more detail rather than just doing the abbreviated version that we have in front of us this evening.
Because they are quite different issues to the ones on,
we'll flash
on
on
those other 2 sites, which aren't the same as well.
Okay, last question from Rosie.
My first, I suppose, quick question, which is just a follow-up from a news point about the previous assessment which was done, is just that I think it's quite strange that given all that information is there, and actually the reason why, I think if I understand correctly, the reason why you now don't think that site 1 is a feasible option is because of the impacts on the wider development. That none of that is kind of listed under the points about plot 1. I mean, if they're the most critical reasons why this is substantially changed, I think it's quite odd that they weren't included originally. I appreciate that this isn't the full draft consultation, but I still think it would have been helpful if we'd been proactively told about them as opposed to having to receive that from residents.
We'll put that in, and also as well we'll reference the what the Council Samurai just mentioned, just because it is out there in the public domain, and just so you know, this is what's changed since that report came out. This is the consideration that we now have. Just to have as much information as possible.
And I suppose second is more a point maybe than a question, but I suppose I'm still concerned that I feel like the focus of our previous meeting, I'd say at least half, if not more, of the discussion that we had was actually not about the pros and cons of the various sites, but about the lack of consultation. And I still feel like this evening, although I appreciate that it looks like a lot of work's gone into this presentation, and thank you for coming back with it, I still feel like we've talked 95% about the pros and cons of the different options and very little about actually what the consultation will look like. And so I was just going to ask if there are plans, I don't know, Chair, whether you're due to come back to the meeting again, or whether we can see a draft of the actual consultation document when it goes out.
So the main purpose behind this evening is to run through and read and confirm that we'd gone through, give us that month, which is very helpful to go through all the sites, make sure that we've been as thorough as is possible to make sure that this, which is a major decision, and there will be the impacts on the local residents, that we're making the right decision. It's as well informed as possible before we get to the point of consulting on what is the preferred option. For the consultation, it's important to remember that the IDM that's in front of me, that's currently paused, authorises that full public consultation to happen, and as soon, hopefully in the next 2 weeks when that's gone through our sausage machine of a constitution, that will then begin. For the consultation itself, I've said to the group of local residents that I met yesterday and before that any consultation events that local residents or residents from the wider area want us to run, we will run. Full public meetings, smaller workshop sessions. We'll also do work with the architects in smaller focus groups if people find that helpful. And the other thing that's going to happen is, over the time of the consultation, and we're now into late October, so it'll begin probably early November. We're into Christmas, so this will have to run November, December, and also into January as well, because obviously people have better things to do. 2 weeks or so for Christmas, then come to public consultation meetings. Is that during that 2-3 month process, the designs and the architecture that's currently just this blocky massing diagram will evolve over time, and at each stage we can then talk to the residents about how that's developing and get further views on that and refine it further throughout that process. So I don't think it's going to be possible today to say these are all the consultation events that are going to happen between now and kind of mid-January. We can probably set out in advance, and we can circulate it to yourselves what the first month looks like, and if there's any recommendation from yourselves or members of the local community, we'll then amend that and include that in the consultation plan, and then it'll kind of just develop, and let's see where the consultation takes us over that into month 2 and month 3. And if you feel you have to call us back or call me back because you're not happy with the way things are going, that's obviously an option available to you as a committee.
Okay, I'm going to move to. Can I see a show of hands of who would like to ask a question at this stage, just so we can manage it in time? Okay, we're at 8:45 now, so I'm just making people aware that time is ticking on. But yes, okay. So the lady there with the grey top on first, and then go ahead.
I'm Catherine Whittaker. I'm the chair of the Canada Rest Residents Action Group. I spoke here last time. I will not go back over the points I made at that time, which of course are in no way addressed by today. That's not necessarily why we're back here. I think what, and I was lucky enough to meet with Councillor Williams yesterday with a smaller delegation from our group, and I'll share one thing that came up there, which we haven't really touched on tonight, and which I think is what's really going on here. I think all the questions from the committee, and certainly the comments around here, points to this concern about reverse engineering of the, we've basically we've made you go away and do your homework, effectively, but the decision has already been taken, and it's trying to justify a decision which is overwhelmingly unpopular in the community. And as I said to Mr. Williams yesterday, you are not going to convince the community that Site 6 is a good site for a leisure centre. So what you are going to have to convince the community about is the real reasons why that site has been chosen. And this is where we get onto the discussion we had yesterday about the fact that we understand, and we are sympathetic to the fact that you need to balance revenue and housing and try and provide a new leisure centre. But that is what's really going on here. You're choosing this site, which in previous master plans was going to have more trees added to it, not taken away. And therefore, we need to know what are the trade-offs. If we say this site is not a good site for leisure centre, I won't go back to all the reasons, they're on record from last time, we as a community need to know what the trade-offs are. I believe that the report that was completely ignored, which we only got through a Freedom of Information request, which, by the way, has far more detail in it than what we've seen today. Absolutely. Far more detail. It's a 50-page report on both sides. And cruises at Seven Islands can be redeveloped with a actually higher spec leisure centre than you're proposing. And I've done the analysis. I can share my spreadsheet with you. I think you need to tell us what it is that is really behind this decision to choose the site. It's not a good site for the leisure centre. The community will fight it tooth and nail. We already are. I've wasted an awful lot of my time this summer getting you to this point. And I would ask you this direct question now, so no one's supposed to ask me a question, which is how many council homes, because I think that's what's changed, is it's about housing and it's about where you can build council homes, which is great and important and necessary, but how many council homes are actually going to be built on the master plan site? I mean the master plan site, not the wider area, because I think what's happening is you're freeing up areas outside the master plan site, which is going to be luxury apartments. Site 1 will be a 40-storey tower, which will not be affordable housing and will not be council.
Okay, let's put that point to the cabinet member.
So I think Catherine, and as we discussed yesterday, is absolutely correct in that there are a number of quite significant pressures facing us as a borough, and that are facing us as we go through the negotiation and renegotiation of the varying land interests at Canada Water and in the master plan area. The things that we're trying to set out, which we published late last year, so it's not a secret, it's out there, is that what we want from it as a council from the renegotiation with British Land and the new scheme that comes forward is we want many more new homes of all kinds, including
Okay, let's let the cabinet member answer the question.
So we want a scheme to come forward that is 35% affordable housing and is policy compliant, and all of the rented homes on there, rather than being affordable rented or going to a housing association, are held by the council. We want an ongoing financial return to the council as well, because we currently receive some rent from the Surrey Quays shopping centre site and from Harmsworth Quay, and we want to maintain some of that rent coming in to help support our services. On the exact number of council homes that we'll achieve through this, at this point we simply don't know, because the the negotiation is ongoing. British Land are taking forward their consultation on the master plan. There's going to be more on that late this year, early next year. But we don't know at the moment the exact number of homes, because we don't know the exact quantum of development. So at this stage in the process, that's an impossible question to answer. But our key priority as a council, we've got a huge housing crisis at the moment in our borough and in London. We need to build as many new homes as we can as possible, but that includes genuinely affordable homes for our residents and council homes. Yes, it will mean on some parts of the redevelopment there are flats that are very expensive, but that will help fund the new council homes and the other facilities that our residents need. And as a council, we need to balance and manage those trade-offs in what is a very difficult environment at the moment with some of the changes that are coming through from the government. Councillor Livingston on the next item is going to be talking about.
Okay, I'm going to move you on.
But at this point, we can't put an exact figure on it, but we want to get a policy compliance scheme, and all of the rented affordable units they'll all be council rented units. So that's what we're aiming for, and that's what we're currently negotiating with British Land.
The gentleman at the back there with the blue jump, you sir, yes, no, you just put your hand down. No, with the yes, yeah.
Okay. I had a question about the process. I live on Hythe Road. And again, going back to the fact that a couple of years ago, 50-page, very, very thorough, much more thorough document than the one we have today was produced for all this. There seem to be some sort of discrepancies between that and the vision you're presenting now. For instance, I mean, just kind of a quick flick through, and forgive me, I've only had a little bit of time to kind of look through the document you've come up with now, but for instance, for the internal square, the internal area of the Seven Islands site, in the previous very much more worked through document, you're talking about 4,630 square metres, and in this one you've got about 4,090 square metres. Also, the question of the tunnel in that car park site where all the recycling areas are now. I mean, it's specifically kind of said in the 50-page document produced in 2013 that this is not really a problem, that you can work around that. And yet now it's being sort of said, oh, we don't know if we can do this. I mean, I think it's it's a bad process to not have shared this, particularly with the members of the council, or member of the committee, who you are now saying, I don't want to kind of accept what you recommended last time. Could you just explain why you didn't share that with the committee, please? And we have there are serious kind of concerns about things not matching up. And how can we actually be confident there's going to be a proper consultation when you're kind of putting through stuff that's being rubber stamped by a committee here that hasn't actually been kind of looked at? And the final thing is, how can this be a fair process if you are coming to a much more advanced position of certainty that this is your preferred site, when less work has been done than 2013, which was still more at the preliminary stage?
So I think what's important to say is the presentation in front of us and in front of us all this evening isn't a fully worked up technical document. It's a presentation. On the difference between the square footage of Seven Islands, I'm not sure. I'd have to go away and double check that. It may be, for example, the green area has been included in one and not the other. But we'd have to go away and double check that. I think from the consultation point of view is that the decision, the decision in front of us today, or in front of me today, that's being considered by committee, is to go forward to full public consultation with this as our preferred site, but talking about following the recommendations from the previous committee meeting, asking residents what they think about the other sites, but being honest as a council and saying this is now our preferred site for the reasons that we're setting out. However, tell us what you think about that. The point at which we make the final decision on whether to proceed with that isn't this evening. It's in about 4 or 5 months' time. During that period, once the decision has been taken, the full detailed work can be done by the architects, by all of the technical specialists, and a document very similar to the one that you just mentioned will be produced, so that the decision that we take as a cabinet and as a council is as well informed as possible to make sure that we're getting all the things we want to get, council houses, etc., but also that we've got this site can accommodate what we want, that we've mitigated as many of the negative impacts as possible if we do go forward with this site, and that it's a site that can actually be delivered, because there's no point coming forward with a site and a scheme if it turns out it can't be built. So all of that information will be gone through, all of that information will be built up over the next 4 or 5 months before we take a final decision as a cabinet. So we've got that time to get that right and be really, really thorough and make sure that it's done properly.
Okay, so I'm going to go the gentleman at the back and then the gentleman at the front next. So go ahead.
Okay, I'm David Potter. I'm a regular user of the Seven Islands Leisure Centre. First of all, I'd just like to say that the proximity of the existing site to Suffolk Park and the athletics track and the tennis courts is pretty unique in London, and it should be seriously considered that it stays there. I wanted to, in the first part, John mentioned about a £2 million budget for the leisure centre, and to me it was unclear whether it was a maintenance to be spent over the next 5 years. And what I'm concerned about, and perhaps Tara can answer this, is that the maintenance is done on the existing Seven Islands Centre, and it's not allowed to fall into disrepair, so you can say in the future, oh, it's unsuitable and we just have to go.
Is that one for Tara? Tara, is that okay to come back on that?
So, excuse me, the £2 million capital fund for municipal maintenance is to address some mechanical and electrical issues currently at the site, and also to refresh some customer-facing areas in order to ensure that we provide good service going forward as best we can. So yeah, basically it will be to maintain the centre going forward.
But we're not going to let it fall apart.
And
because people have said to me about particularly ladies changing areas upstairs with the toilets don't work and the problems with the senior areas. That's not being maintained at the moment.
We'll be looking to address all of those issues.
Okay, thank you for that. Gentleman at the front.
Thank you, Chair. I want to get down to the nitty-gritty of the local feeling in the area, just to give the benefit to the members that don't live in the area. One thing that's missing here is planning, the word planning, good quality planning. We've got a blank canvas in the area. British Land have got that blank canvas. We need to make sure that they paint a nice picture. There's good stuff going on in the area, it's not all bad, but the thing is that the history of it is that in 2007 British Land were chosen. There were 3 bidders, multiplex, urban design architects. British Land's won that because their jewel in the crown was an all singing, all dancing, fantastic swimming pool, right where British Home Stores is at the moment, on the corner of Camden, with a floating swimming pool in. Now we're looking at another one. In Canada Water itself. This is the one that decided it for local people. That was taken away from us. As soon as they won the bid, they took it away. So for this, in those days, there was 2,000 flats envisaged for the area. There's now 6,000, plus infill on top of that happening as we speak. So what's happened recently with the choice of Off-Field Place is a real downer in the area. We feel we've been very, very poorly let down in the area, because it's all down to one thing really, it's greed. It's greed for revenue. We understand the council's problem, we're trying to get social housing, and we're all for more social housing in the area. I come from the Dickens estate, I know what it's like, I've lived in there for 60 years. But the thing is, we're starting to argue amongst ourselves, I'm afraid, with the great residents in Nanmoss Way and Gone Road against Off-Field Place. Seven Islands is in the wrong place. It is totally in the wrong place. It is totally unsafe. You would never ever send your child or a couple of your young kids down there to go swimming because of the A200. It's a notorious black spot. So it's in the wrong place. It's out of date. To refurbish it is wrong. Totally wrong. We need a new, all singing, all dancing, what we promised in the past, swimming pool with all the leisure facilities on the rich table, and that's what we call it in the area, the rich table, which is the master plan area. British Land obviously want to maximise their profits. The council are trying to muscle in now and get what they can in areas. There is a way to get this done on the rich table. The overspill car park, I think, more personally, it's all about opinions, is number one. It needs to go on the overspill car park. It's big enough. We need to look at it. There's going to be a 70% increase in the population of the Rob White Peninsula in the next 15 years. 70%. 28,500 people live on the peninsula now. It'll be 45,000 plus. If this is done properly, which it should be, green links going through the area.